Let's bring in our panel. Joining us, Skyping in from Washington, D.C., former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz, and here at our South Florida Newsmax anchor desk, former CIA officer Fred Rustmann. Gentlemen, to you both, we thank you. Fred Fleitz, let me begin with you. What long-term effects will the release of this report have on the CIA?
Well, J.D. and Fred, it's great to be with you this morning. In terms of terrorist threats, I think it's going to be a short-term matter. I think this will pass. The outrage over these programs occurred several years ago. I'm not real concerned that this is going to have a long-term effect in terms of terrorist threats. I do think it is going to hurt our relationships with intelligence partners in the future when we need to conduct a controversial operation. We're just telling other countries, you can't trust the United States because we will rat you out later that you worked with us. And I also think it has seriously undermined congressional oversight. Intelligence officials and officers and agencies are going to be less willing to trust and cooperate with the Senate Intelligence Committee after this partisan report.
Fred Rustmann, you heard what Fred Fleitz had to say. We talked about recruitment and agents earlier, but what about the relationships we have internationally with other intelligence organizations?
Well, Fred's absolutely right. Half of the intelligence that the clandestine service, anyway, produces comes from our liaison relationships abroad. And they have to trust us in order to be willing to pass information to us and to be upfront with us. And this is absolutely going to damage those relationships.
Fred Fleitz, in your opinion, do you believe this is a situation that basically hands the Islamo-fascists a propaganda tool to use to help their recruitment?
Definitely. It's definitely going to be used by the Islamic State and by Al-Qaeda. I think it will have a short-term effect in increasing the threat level, but I'm hopeful that this will pass.
And Fred Rustmann, let me get back to you for the historical perspective on what you have seen during your days in the agency. We spoke earlier about the Church Committee in the Senate, the Pike Committee in the House. A lot of people said in the mid-70s that was really the start of a caution, a timidity, the triumph of the desk officer rather than the case officer or the field officer, and that led to 9/11. Does this set up the same kind of problem?
It does, not to the extent probably of the Pike and Church committees of the mid-70s. But I want to say one thing about this. We just had Senator McCain on just a few moments ago. And Senator McCain talked about torture and how bad that was and we shouldn't do this. And Senator McCain endured a lot of torture while he was in the Hanoi Hilton. And I agree with Senator McCain. But what I want to point out is that waterboarding and enhanced interrogations is not torture. These techniques have been endured by literally thousands of American special operation forces and intelligence guys in their SEER training, their resistance to interrogation training. These will not do permanent harm to anyone. There's a doctor in the room. This is not torture. If Senator McCain had endured this type of enhanced interrogation while he was in Hanoi, he wouldn't be walking around like he does right now with dislocated shoulders and the lasting effects.
Fair enough.
So this is legal and this is not torture.
Fred Rustmann in South Florida, Fred Fleitz in Washington, we thank you for your analysis. We'll continue the conversation after this. Let's continue our conversation with former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz, who Skypes in from Washington, and also here from our South Florida anchor desk, our friend, former CIA case officer Fred Rustmann. Gentlemen, to you both, thanks for staying here. To Fred Fleitz, the international community starting to speak out about the release of this report, human rights groups calling for the prosecution of officials who sanctioned this CIA program. Here's what Ben Emerson, an international human rights lawyer, had to say, quoting now, "It is now time to take action. The individuals responsible for the criminal conspiracy must be brought to justice and must face criminal penalties commensurate with the gravity of their crimes." Fred Fleitz, CIA officers accused of war crimes, courtesy of this Senate report?
This is really laughable, JD. And these guys would prosecute George Bush if he showed up in the wrong country. Let's keep in mind that a special prosecutor was named by the Obama administration to look into this program. It closed its inquiry in 2012 with no prosecutions, no legal action was taken. These guys are always going to want to prosecute the United States for one thing or another. It's not a surprise they're jumping on this one.
Fred Rustmann, let me get your reaction to what transpires in the international community, perhaps most infamously at the UN and the International Court at The Hague. Is this as predictable as Fred Fleitz points out?
It is. And I am sure glad I don't work there anymore. We talked about in the mid-'70s the Church and Pike committees and how risk-averse this caused the agency to become. And we've never recovered from that totally. And this is going to just make it worse. We're going to become risk-averse. Our liaison partners are not going to be as cooperative with us. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're the tip of the spear here. We're fighting the enemy alongside of our military. What is with these people? I don't understand it.
And let me return to Fred Fleitz in Washington. About 2 minutes left, really more like a minute 30, Fred. This situation, to have international, quote, human rights lawyers wanting to put Americans in the docket when the Islamo-fascists we face, by and large, are not part of nation states, don't observe the conventions of warfare, and engage in the ultimate torture of beheading hostages they take. Why this double standard excusing the Islamo-fascists?
I wish I could explain that, JD, but it goes back a long time. And when I talk about President Bush being in fear of arrest in certain countries, I'm not joking. That we know that due to a bizarre legal theory being practiced in the European Union, Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush, there's certain countries they don't visit because there may be a secret indictment against them once they land in their country. Israeli officials are also subject to that. I suspect that Michael Hayden and other CIA officials named in this report will be subject to secret indictments by European countries and will have to avoid traveling to certain places for fear of being arrested, possibly in relation to the International Criminal Court.
And with 30 seconds, Fred Rustmann, that prompts this question. What on earth do Americans do to reassert their sovereignty? How do we get any respect from the international community?
Well, our respect is diminishing rapidly, and it has just taken a jump off the precipice. But I'm like Fred, I'm concerned about this, but I'm not as concerned with George Bush traveling in East Prison. I'm concerned with the CIA case officer. That's the guy that we're putting in jeopardy in this, and his job has just become a lot harder.
And does the CIA now morph into a big bureaucracy, ineffective in terms of intelligence? One of the implications, America's Forum continues.